Confident living, banner of might, comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control.
I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about changing the losses in your life to victories. In New Thought, we believe that we live in our minds and not in the world. That means that what goes on inside us is equally as important as what takes place in our external lives. This may be a new concept to you, but it is a principle, it is an idea, and it is a thought that we would like to invite you to explore with us. In all of our lives, yours, mine, and everyone's, there are losses, there are difficulties, and there are challenges. And we need to realize and remember that in the midst of all of these circumstances of life, we have to deal with the reality of our own attitude, what goes on in our minds and in our thought processes. If our minds are set in a positive mode, we're much more likely to be able to deal with the circumstances and situations of life than if we're in a negative mode of life. If we are survivors, and if our mentality and the dynamic of our mind strengthens our surviving capabilities, the abilities that we have to deal with circumstances and situations, we begin to have control, take control, and to be empowered in our life experience. The one thing that's true about all of our lives is that life is filled with challenges for every one of us, and it has nothing to do with your faith tradition, it has nothing to do with your background, your culture, it has nothing to do with the church you go to, it has to do with the reality that every one of us in life are faced with challenges. And since we know that we're faced with challenges, what we have is an opportunity to face and look at and examine and experience every challenge in a very positive way. And that's why this topic of having victory over our losses is so important. The ideas that we're going to share with you have to do with changing your way of thinking about the situations of your life. It also has to do with connecting yourself with the dynamic power of the universe, with the reality of God. And when we connect with that reality, as we call divine intelligence or infinite intelligence, that mind of God with our human mind, magnificent and wonderful things begin to happen. When we embrace this concept of changing the way that we think, then we take responsibility, we take the obligation of changing the way that we think about circumstances and situations, and we give up trying to control how circumstances take place. So often in our lives, we believe that we would like things to be changed. We would like circumstances to be different than they are. But the reality is that circumstance and situation is the way that it is. And so it is easier, it is more empowering, and it is more prospering from a spiritual standpoint and from a material and standpoint of daily life to change our way of thinking, to change us, instead of changing the circumstance and situation. When that process begins to happen, when we begin to change our way of thinking, it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter how difficult the circumstance or situation is, because it isn't the circumstance that dictates how we feel. It isn't the circumstance that dictates our response. It is us. It is our way of thought. And it is a process of seeking change within ourselves to change our vision of what we see as the challenge or the difficulty or the circumstance that brings us to a point of pain or suffering or unhappiness in our lives. There are a few principles that we can use to begin to employ this process of changing our mind. One is to impose a sense of order in our lives. And when I say a sense of order in our lives, I mean our surroundings in our household and in our home and in our office and our place of business, in our community, but also to have a sense of order about the dynamic and the process of our mind. So often our minds move so rapidly from one thought to another, from the problem to the past experiences, to what people have said or what people have done or what we wish things were or the way that we think that things ought to be. But in reality, we have the ability to place within our own mind a process of order and of peace The easiest way to deal with difficulties in life is to move our vision away from the difficulty or the problem and to place our mind in a place where there is peace and order. And in that process, we begin to impose order in our external lives and in our internal lives. We begin to do this by monitoring the way that we think, the things that we say, the things that go on in our mind dynamic and in the process of our mind. And if we begin that process, we can begin to put our mind in order and our life in order, and we are well on the way to beginning the process of putting our losses and challenges and converting them into victories in our lives. Each one of us has a choice in every circumstance and situation that we have in life. And as we make a choice, either to be a victim or a survivor, either to be defeated or to be an overcomer, either to be in the midst of our depression, our difficulty, or our loss, or to step out of it. That is a process of mind, and it happens inside us. And so the transformation of your thinking, the transformation of the dynamic of your mind begins with you, and it begins inside you. And it has very little to do with what happens outside. It has very little to do with the external experiences. One of the things that we use in New Thought a great deal is prayer and meditation. If you come from a traditional faith background, you probably have learned to pray in a certain way, and you've been taught many things about prayer. Perhaps you've been taught less about meditation. And in our faith tradition, in our philosophy, in metaphysical thought, in New Thought, we believe in prayer and meditation as processes through which we move our mind, the dynamic of our mind, and the reality of our indwelling being, our spiritual self, our soul or our spirit, to a place of order and a place of transformation. In that process, we can think of prayer as the process when we talk to God or speak to that which is divine. But meditation is a quieting time when we enter into a period of reflection, introspection, and openness to the speaking of God, the speaking of divine mind, the speaking of infinite intelligence to our heart and mind. The Quakers called it the quiet center. Other faith traditions have different words for it. The real key to this concept is to know that deep within every one of us, there is a centering presence, there is a power, and there is a strength that we can summon up and that we can call upon. In this process, as we put our mind in order, as we put our life in order, as we make a choice to transform ourselves from dealing with pain or suffering or loss or difficulty in a negative way and begin to operate from that center, which is the peaceful, quiet place within us, our minds and our lives move into a different mode, into a different process, and into a different way of behaving, acting, and reacting. The next step is to take the opportunities that we have and deal with the reality that life is the way that it is. Every circumstance that comes into your life and into my life is a reality in this physical world. No matter how much we pray, no matter how much we meditate, no matter how much we manifest or create, if you are from a New Thought tradition, the reality is that you are where you are at any given time in your life experience. And because of that, we need to realize and accept the reality of where we are. If you're at a point in your life right now where you're facing a challenge, that challenge is real. If you're facing a health difficulty, that health difficulty is real. If you're facing a financial crisis, that financial crisis is real. But the power that that crisis has, whether it be financial or health or physical or whatever relationship, whatever it may be in your life, the power that it has over you is a choice that you can make. And the power that it has over you is totally and completely limited. The experience doesn't control you, but your way of thinking, your way of acting and reacting to the process of the problem or the challenge determines how you're going to deal with what you're facing today. An important part of this process of transformation and converting and transforming difficulties into victories in life has to do with the support systems that you have. So often we try to do so much by ourselves, and there is much that we can do by ourselves, but we also need to draw upon the support of others. We need the support of family and friends, of groups, of churches, of organizations, And wherever we are in life, when we are faced with challenges, we need to surround ourselves with supportive people. We need to surround ourselves with those of like mind who know and understand the truth principles that we're talking about, those who view life in a positive way, those who release and let go of guilt, those who are willing to surround the reality of whatever circumstance you're facing with the truth that you can know the way, that you can be guided out of any circumstance and situation when you center yourself in perfect peace, when you center yourself in the presence and the power of infinite intelligence, when you bring peace and order to your mind, to your heart, and your life, and begin the process of transforming your way of thinking, of reacting and behaving in the face of difficulty and challenge and circumstance. I don't know what you face today. I don't know what you're going to face in the future, but I know that you and I and all of us in this human experience will be challenged from time to time. And the challenges of life bring to us the greatest opportunities that we can ever have of becoming overcomers of the influence that these experiences have upon us. And through that overcoming power, we can learn and grow and become empowered and strengthened in the face of adversity, and we can be victorious over any circumstance or situation. It begins with a change in the way that you think. It begins with a connectiveness between you and God. It begins when you impose order and peace in your mind. It begins when you enter into a time of meditation, reflection, and unity with the power and grace of God. It begins when you surround yourself with people who will support you in this quest for a new way of living and a new way of thought. We believe in prayer and meditation as a centering force, as a dynamic that can strengthen and empower our lives. And we'd like to invite you at this point in the program to pause for a few moments for a prayer and reflection with us. Eternal and loving God, we gather our hearts and minds together in the reality that all of the losses that we experience create for us tremendous opportunities to claim the overcoming power that you give us as victorious followers of a living God. We claim the harmony and the peace, the quiet center of every experience, and we do this in the name of faith, the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
Those were fantastic reminders about how to go from losses to peaceful living.
Well, I think the key is that we all face losses, and so often people of all faith traditions want to believe that if they live a certain way, if they do something, if they're good, that they'll avoid losses and difficulties. But the reality is that we all experience them.
That's so unfortunate that people think they're being punished because bad things happen in their lives, or that others think it of their friends or family. Because, of course, as you teach so well, that's not true at all.
Not true at all. And these things that we see as punishments really are teaching us the lessons that we need to learn in the experience of life, because life is really a school for our soul.
Yes. And I like the pointers you gave on how to move from losses to victory, because sometimes if we're really down, we need pointers, we need reminders. And those were wonderful reminders, and especially the one to move your vision from chaos to order, that's something we can do.
We can all do it, and so often when we have chaos in our lives, we focus on the chaos,
yes,
and we become enmeshed in it, and we go deeper and deeper into it.
Yes, and it's so easy to just be in a slough of despond and not pull ourselves out. But it's also just as easy to do it. It's as you say so often, the mindset. It's whatever we decide to do, that's what we're going to do.
And our mind determines everything, everything about life. And so if our mindset is focused on the problem, or if even we're not focused on the problem, but we're simply focused on the negative influences of life, and we become a part of them, then they just become more and more dynamic in our lives, more crippling, more paralyzing, and more destructive.
That's right. And of course, in our church, we teach that we create thought forms, and the thought form is tangible. It's right there. And if we are still in this slough of despond, we're creating negative thought forms. But if we've moved our vision to victory and to that which is uplifting, then we're creating positive thought forms.
And that creative dynamic is one that I think we all need to be aware of, because as we create with our minds, every word, thought, and deed creates
Yeah.
has a cause and an effect in life. And so if we create negative thoughts and we create negativity, we simply become deeper and deeper in the mire of that.
Yes. And you mentioned prayer and meditation as being one way out, and indeed it is. And people have proved that over and over for centuries and forever, because we can go into prayer and listen to God, talk to God, and then we can go into meditation and listen, and we do receive answers. And we've seen it happen tangibly with so many people and in our own lives.
And that second step that you talked about, which is so important, and we believe it's so much a part of the process of communion with God, and that is moving from prayer into meditation.
Yes.
And for those of more traditional backgrounds, I think it's a new concept, and sometimes it's a difficult one to understand in terms of the importance when we appeal to God for our need or for our circumstance or our situation. That only begins the process. And if we stay in that appeal mode, we go deeper and deeper into the victim mode.
Yes.
And that's not to say at all that prayer is victimizing,
Right.
but it is to say that prayer begins the process that moves us from prayer to meditation, so that we're able to speak our need to God and voice our needs, but then we need to be quiet and we need to listen and let God respond.
Yes.
So.
And then we can go even further and have it be contemplation. And that is such a wonderful space to be in. And I would urge everyone to do that when they listen and they take notes. And I mean, literally take notes to see the information, to list the information they've received, and then to go right into contemplation. And it's just so renewing. And if people would take time to do that, there would be less tiredness in the world and less tiredness individually, because that's what it does. It relaxes them, and all the tension drains out of their body. And they've done their prayer work, and then their asking, and then the meditation of listening for answers to their questions. And then that is such a wonderful thing, and so many people don't think of it.
They don't think of it, and they don't take that next step of moving from prayer into meditation and
Yes.
into contemplation
Yes.
and beyond into adoration or into the other experiences of meditative prayer.
Right, because there's so many things we can do with our meditation. Supplication is not left out either, because we do. And then there's just so many, in every aspect of life, we can bring that into our meditation, and then go right into just the bliss of knowing.
And then that brings us to that centering of peace.
Yes.
That we talked about. And,
Yes.
and that drawing upon our peaceful center is absolutely imperative. And so many people we talk to believe they don't have a peaceful center because they're so vibrating
Yes.
with the difficulties and the challenges, or they're so deeply enmeshed in the problem that they face. But we're all challenged to see and to seek and to claim that peaceful center.
Yes, and we know we've talked before about business people such as yourself who have been successful in business because they've taken the time to listen to their inner voice within. And I'm amazed that science and religion are seemingly far apart, because to me they're not. Because scientists take time to listen always, and they take cat naps or naps of various types. And that's when when they're in that stage of just on the brink of sleep, that's when they receive their information. And they always receive what they're seeking.
And that intuitiveness
Yes.
is something that we don't think about so much in science, and yet scientific people and business people and worldly people,
Yes.
secular people, if you will, not that there's anything wrong or bad about being secular, so we don't want to sound like that, but even in the midst of those experiences that seem so logical and tangible, we all draw upon the intuitive nature that we have. And the intuition is nothing more than connecting our mind with the mind of God, with infinite intelligence.
Exactly. And so if the great scientists can do it, and if business people can do it, then the average person can do it. And I consider myself the average person, and I've used that technique so often in my own life when I face problems, when I've faced a crisis. And sometimes in crisis we do forget in the beginning of the crisis to do just that. But in the greatest help we can ever receive comes from within.
Comes from within, and then we move from the aspect of meditation into that aspect of life where we need support.
Exactly.
And we need to be surrounded, and we need to seek out people who are supportive of us.
Yes, yes. Well, that's another important aspect that we need to remember. But we get our greatest help, I think, from within. And I know when I faced really knotty problems in my own personal life and have looked within, I've received answers, and they've been phenomenal.
And of course, in our lives, in all of our lives, we're faced with difficulties in life. And when we're first faced with a problem, it seems so insurmountable. It
Yes.
seems to take us so aback and to be so devastating. And it can be a relatively small matter, but at the time it seems to be immense and terrible. And we've all had them. One of the most common, I think, for every one of us has to do with financial difficulties
Yeah.
or reverses. We're all faced at times with difficulties where whether it's that we don't have enough resources or we end up with a problem of having too many resources that create liabilities for us, and to be faced with a large tax bill or whatever it is that we're faced with. Finances have so much impact upon the way that we feel, because the financial aspect of our lives challenges and actually puts at risk in our own minds our way of life. And yet these financial difficulties can be overcome in the same way.
Exactly, exactly. And we must do that to save our own sanity, because we all face reversals, we all face problems, and people who are very extremely wealthy have the same problems because they're losing some of their money from time to time. And so it's no different in any aspect. We just have to know what we have and then live within those means. And so many people refuse to do that, and it creates their own turmoil, because they won't be realistic.
They won't be realistic and responsible.
Yes.
And the responsibility of life creates for us the fact that if we need more resources, or if we desire more resources, we have to call upon the intelligence of the universe combined with our own intuition and intelligence to manifest or bring about the resources that we need. But to begin to live before we create
Yes.
is a process that creates difficulty.
But living with faith, a faith-filled life, goes very far, because we're creating positive thought forms around us as we exercise faith. And then when we're the opposite, then we're creating the opposite.
And our vision of life is so important, how we visualize ourselves, whether it's a financial situation, a health situation, a relationship situation. If we visualize ourselves, if we see ourselves as being able to cope in a positive way and in an overcoming fashion, then that's what we become. If we see ourselves being defeated, we are defeated.
That is so true. I used to teach at a modeling school. For 14 years I taught at a modeling school and self-improvement school, and the women would come there feeling unlovely and downtrodden, but they would learn how to dress, how to do their makeup and hair, and it would be ever so much different for them. And that's what everyone has to do, is to study. We said, study yourself, know yourself, do all you can to change that which you wish to, and then forget yourself. Well, that's part of the process that I think is the same process you were describing, to do all you can to change something, and then whatever the situation, and then forget it, think in a positive way instead of thinking in the negative aspect.
Right, because what you're doing in that process is conditioning the mind to behave the way it should.
Exactly.
And the way it should is to see ourselves in a positive way, to see ourselves as beautiful. But to believe that we do nothing and we don't have any obligation to take care of ourselves in a physical sense, and to just sit and expect the universe to manifest our beauty isn't the way that it works at all.
No.
And so it is a process of becoming, and it's a process of unfolding, and it's a process of moving through what needs to be done to make ourselves attractive and to make ourselves beautiful and to make ourselves healthy and prosperous and centered and peaceful and loving.
Exactly. And doing what we can. And the same is true then in financial problems. The same is true in family turmoil situations where there's controversy, or friends or acquaintances or work situation. We just have to study it, study the problem, see what we can change, and change whatever we can.
And the change needs to be within ourselves. We need to change, not the situation. So often we want the situation to change. But the situation doesn't need to change. It doesn't matter what happens to us. What matters is what happens in us.
It's how we view it. I remember a woman saying one time to her minister that, no, my family has not changed, but I have. And indeed, it changed her entire life by just seeing herself in a different light, and the situation in a different light.
And the situation, though it didn't change, the impact that it had upon her changed because she changed.
Exactly.
Her way of viewing it changed.
And that, in a sense, changed her situation, because she was able to cope with it.
And there we have again the creative power of mind,
Yeah.
because the dynamic of her mind creating a new vision, and that vision became a reality, and so that creative process of mind brought into her life a totally different circumstance and situation.
Yes, and with no question, that woman was helped through prayer and meditation. That's what helped her, because she asked for help. She saw what was wrong in her family situation, what she was doing wrong, what her family was doing that made her unhappy, and why they did it. And then she was able to cope with it because she could see more fully why the family did the way they did.
And she was able to move on.
Right, exactly. And then the whole family moved on in a more viable way. Because then when she took out some of the turmoil or ceased her own part, then everyone else calmed down. And that's true of any problems. It's with our own mind, as you say so well, we live in our minds. So if we calm our minds, are one pointed in prayer and meditation, then we are able to think clearly and concisely.
Because when those two things happen, we're at that peaceful center.
Yes.
We automatically go there. And of course, the dynamic that we need is to be able in mind to go to that peaceful presence and that peaceful place whenever we need to.
Yes, and there's always an answer for everything. And Dale Carnegie, I think it was, made the system popular of deciding the very worst thing that could happen, the worst case scenario, deciding what you're going to do if that does happen indeed, and then go on with your life as if it's not going to happen. But first, in our minds, we do that. And I've done that in the past too. I bet you have too.
We all have,
Yeah.
and I think that demonstration creates for us a real belief in exactly the principles that we've been talking about. And during this program, the Reverend Freelander and I have been talking about ideas in which you can become victorious overcomers of the difficulties that you have. And we hope that you found this information to be useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart.